So let's get into the Odyssey nightclub. Let's talk about it.
Yeah, it's a pretty crazy story. So, like you said, kind of tying in with like the whole theme of sexual abuse, there was this nightclub in California, in Hollywood, West Hollywood, in the early 80s, and it was called the Odyssey. And it sounds like just the most bizarre nightclub of all time. And basically, how I learned about it and how it kind of re-entered the news was in about 2020 or so, right around 2020, there was audio from this phone call that leaked online, and it was a guy calling into Child Protective Services. And he was saying, "Hey, I grew up in West Hollywood. I grew up in like the entertainment, industry, and I witnessed some awful things, and I want to tell you about it and, see what happens." And he said all this like abuse and child trafficking and stuff, a lot of it happened at this nightclub named the Odyssey that was really popular. And what the Odyssey was it was a 5 a.m. dance club, and it was kind of like known as like a gay bar. So it was a 5 a.m. dance club. They didn't serve alcohol, so there
By
was
the way, if
no.
you're dancing at 5 a.m., you're gay. I mean, there's no straight guys or no straight people are dancing at 5 a.m. Gays, they got nowhere to be. They're just dancing.
But the crazy thing about the Odyssey is that they didn't serve alcohol, so there was no age limit. And so this guy who called into Child Protective Service, his name was Richie Albertini. He talked about how he was in high school at the time in the early 80s, and him and his friends would go to the Odyssey 6, 7 nights a week and just party there until 5 a.m. And I guess there was just drugs everywhere at this place, the Odyssey. There was a lot of like really shady characters who liked the fact that, 14, 15, 16-year-old kids were going to this place and doing drugs and staying there till 4 or 5 a.m. And it just seemed like as I was like listening to this phone call and listening to him describing the Odyssey, it just seemed like such a bizarre, like just almost surreal that a place like this existed, but it did. And so I kind of started like, looking into it and learning as much as I could about it just because I was so perplexed by the whole thing. And the craziest thing about the Odyssey is that it was owned by this guy. His name was Eddie Nash. And so Eddie Nash was like considered probably the biggest gangster on the West Coast throughout like the 1970s and 1980s. He was the guy who was involved in the Wonderland murders,
Oh
which is
my
like one of the most,
God.
yeah. And so that's like one of the most notorious crimes in LA. Um, I mean, again, like this guy was basically considered like the biggest gangster on the West Coast, and he owned this 5 a.m. nightclub for teenagers, and he owned a bunch of different places in Hollywood. He owned like at his height, he owned like 20 some nightclubs in Hollywood.
Oh my God, really?
Yeah, yeah. And like there's a movie, it was called Wonderland. It was about the Wonderland murders from like the early 2000s. He was depicted in that. Supposedly like there was a character in Boogie Nights that's based on Eddie Nash. Um like one of the really crazy characters. It's been a while since I've seen Boogie Nights.
It's been a
But
while.
yeah. But yeah, I mean this Eddie Nash guy is just sounds like he was just one of the most evil, brutal people. And he owned this 5 a.m. nightclub for teenagers. His real name was Adel Nasrallah, so he immigrated here from the Middle East. And so
Gay
there's,
Middle Easterns, dude. They
yeah,
like it weird. There's just something about money and power, and you just
yeah,
get into like all the shit that goes on in Saudi Arabia and all that stuff, and
oh,
then they bring it
yeah,
here into West Hollywood, which is, I've been around long enough. I went to San Francisco early, late 90s, early 2000s to do stand up, and it's gay. It was gay at the time. But
yeah,
nothing's West Hollywood gay. West Hollywood gay
yeah.
is the mecca of gay. It is the industry of gay. It is the gayest of gay. I've never been anywhere where like billboards of just. I used to like when my dad would come, I just driving through West Hollywood, just have him look at the billboards, just men's ass, and just see if he could compute what was happening. Dude. I'm like, Dad,
Oh.
what do you think they're selling here? What do you think they're Oh, I have no clue, son. What are they selling, Dad? Man ass. That's what they're selling, dog. Um, so it's very interesting. At 5 a.m., man. And
Yeah, it's nuts. And then like the guy, so the guy's name who made the phone call in 2020, his name was Richie Albertini. He also was like a part-time actor. He also worked at the Viper Room for Johnny Depp. He was like the head dude, like one of the head dudes at the Viper Room. So he told some stories about the Viper Room. The whole phone call he has is like just absolutely incredible. But one of the things he tells about the Odyssey is that he had a 14-year-old friend who was getting abused by this 42-year-old guy who was a regular at the Odyssey. And the 42 and the 14-year-old friend, his dad was a cop, so he stole his dad's revolver and blew away the 42-year-old one night. And you can find like articles about this. It actually did happen. And what's crazy is like they talk about in the article how this 42-year-old guy, his name was Larry Benjamin. He was apparently just always at the Odyssey. He had a 16-year-old roommate, and then he was killed by this 14-year-old kid at like 4 in the morning at his apartment. And I mean, the article, I show it in the video I made about the Odyssey, but the article is just like this terrible, like, cover up job. They talk about how this Larry Benjamin guy was a benefactor, they call him, and how he had an argument with his 14-year-old friend. They literally use the term friend. I mean, it's just crazy. But this Richie Albertini guy talks about this as like a buddy of his. He also talks how one of his best friends growing up, who he went to the Odyssey with all the time, was Robert Arquette from the Arquette acting family. And he talks about how this Robert Arquette was just put through horrible, horrible shit by, older men. And so Robert Arquette, he's from the Arquette acting family. He's the one who transitioned into Alexis Arquette in the early
hold
2000s.
on, hold on. Rewind this back a little bit. Say what you just said right now.
So this Richie Albertini, one of his best friends was Robert Arquette back in the day. So as teenagers, they would go to this Odyssey club all the time. And this Richie Albertini on the call claimed that Robert Arquette was just abused like horribly by
Oh
older
my
men.
God, that's awful.
I know. And I mean, he tells some pretty horrible stories on the call. And then, yeah, in like the early 2000s, before transitioning to trans was cool, Robert Arquette became Alexis Arquette. He transitioned into a woman, and uh, and then ended up dying just a few early, I
Yeah,
don't know,
not that long
2009 or
ago.
so. Yeah, it wasn't that long ago. And even like Robert or Alexis Arquette's like death is like kind of suspicious because she was like, or she or he or whatever, was like really posting crazy stuff on social media at the time, like about Will Smith being gay and like really getting deep. And I made a video just about Alexis Arquette and what Richie says on the call. And even like after Alexis Arquette died, there were friends who were saying that at the time he or she or whatever was working on a tell-all book, and it was described by a friend as this book would have been the most explosive Hollywood tell-all book ever. Because apparently, like this Robert Alexis Arquette knew a lot of secrets about a lot of people in Hollywood and was going to spill the beans. And then he died. She died.
Well, I mean, when you look at the LA Sheriff badge, literally has the pedophile symbol in it over and
Right.
over and over again. And
Right.
it goes back to what we talked about earlier, where like, the apex predators, they're the criminals and they're the law enforcement.
Yeah.
And they
Oh yeah.
compromise. Now, this thing just happened out of Vegas. The sheriff that was working the Vegas shooting, he just got sent to
Honolulu.
Maui, right?
Yeah, right before the
And
fires.
right there before the fires, and now they put him on administrative leave because he's been named in these P Diddy lawsuits,
Whoa, I
which
didn't know that.
which is getting really muddy too. Kirk kind of brought it up earlier in this day of Twitter and all this stuff, but so these lawsuits are coming out and they're really crazy. Like already Jay-Z won his lawsuit. He already won his lawsuit that it didn't happen. And I'm starting to wonder if the whole thing is flooded with ridiculously stupid lawsuits so nobody pays attention to it anymore. Because now they got
Right.
this Drewski guy, this woman that names like P. Diddy, Drewski. Is that how you pronounce his name? I don't even know.
Yeah.
And then who's the giant that did the crazy catch? OBJ. Odell
Oh
Beckham,
yeah.
and like the language in it is so ridiculous. It makes you like not want to take it. Like she goes, they oiled me up and they rode me like a slip and slide, and I'm like,
Yeah.
is that the terminology that a rape
Yeah.
victim would use? And then you go, okay, here's another crazy lawsuit. Like, are they flooding it? Are they flooding
Yeah.
this thing with such ridiculous lawsuits that everyone doesn't get taken serious? So when a real one comes along, they don't say
Yeah.
anything.
Oh yeah. I think like the same thing happens with a lot of like I could go back to the JFK killing. I mean, there's like 9 million theories about, who killed him and who's involved. And I think a lot of those are kind of like this P. Diddy thing. I think a lot of those are plants
Yeah.
where it's like if people were going on the right path or kind of figuring it out, they just throw all these ridiculous stories out or rumors out or people out, and it just really muddies the waters and it makes it almost, impossible to actually
Also,
like,
sorry, what better way
no.
to obscure your own involvement than to get
Oh
truly innocent
yeah.
people involved? If they're truly innocent, then it's going to add that quality of innocence to your own defense if you're on
Yeah.
the side and then that because like OBJ came out really strongly. It was like, dude, this is crazy. I don't know what the fuck you're talking about.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I mean, like so many of the Me Too things were just absolutely ridiculous. But at the time, it was like CAA was pushing it.
Yeah.
They have everybody under them. Everybody's gonna
Yeah.
push crazy. I mean, it's really nuts. It's really nuts. But yeah, so you go back to this, and again, Obama, his chef found who is accomplished swimmer
Yeah.
and they find him he just drowned,
Yeah.
and supposedly he has a book coming out. All those, you remember when we had just a rash of suicides with the lead singer Soundgarden, lead singer
Yeah.
who else, who went out, Charles Bennington,
Chester,
Yeah, right.
um who's the guy who did the chef show,
Anthony Bourdain.
Oh, Anthony
Anthony
Bourdain, yeah.
Bourdain, and they all like
Kate
died in
Spade.
weird. Kate Spade died in weird ways, like
Yeah.
weird ways.
Yeah.
You know, um, it's like the silence people.
Yeah.
Very famous on that. So it's like, she's about to put out a book, and all of a sudden
Mm-hmm.
she's dead.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I mean, going back to the JFK thing, like it's wild. I don't know if you've ever seen the list of like all the witnesses and like the people associated with it who died years later. The same is true for Watergate. There's a list of like 20, 30, 40 people who've died who like died in like the years after Watergate.
The
And
Vegas
like,
shooting too. Tons of
yeah.
people all around that, witnesses that were just suddenly like
Oh
they died
yeah.
in suspicious ways.
Yep. Like right after the, yeah.
So crazy, man. It's like I think murdering somebody still is a big deal, but I
Yeah.
also believe like that. I mean, they just won't very. I mean, obviously, there's that famous Iceman assassin story where he had to get jumped in. He just walked up to somebody walking their dog and shot him in the back of the head, and that's how he got jumped into the assassin gang. Obviously, that does happen, right? But I think like taking out some people is a lot bigger deal than people think it is. And so, but when they have to do it, they have to do it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's easier to assassinate someone's character, especially with social media and everything like that. You assassinate their credibility, their character, kind of like, any sort of politician running. Always see these smear articles and trying to, dig up dirt on them and whatnot. Assassinating their character or assassinating their reputation is a lot of ways like easier than just like going outright and killing them.
And I'm going to
But
say this about LA. I do believe that like everyone looks at Vegas as the city of sin. It's like such a great slogan where you can just go, but it's way more corporate,
yeah.
way more corporate than Los Angeles. LA is like it's way more debauchery in Los Angeles. Way more debauchery because everyone comes to LA even on a Greyhound bus wanting to be like, a star, and they don't realize how stacked the odds are against them. You're going up against kids, rich kids who grew up here, whose friends and family all are the casting directors and producers. You're going
Yeah.
up. It's like it's so rigged. But what people are willing to do to get in, like, there's a very famous story about J Lo. Like women go and wait tables at the Laugh Factory because J Lo worked there. You go there, their wait staff is stunning. And you go there, you're like, oh,
Right.
the comedy, like all, comedy stores, same thing, gorgeous, gorgeous girls. But the Laugh Factory is known for having gorgeous waitresses, and it's because J Lo went there. But then
I
you
didn't know that.
study,
That's funny. I didn't know
you
that.
work there, yeah. But then you study like J Lo's ascent and how like there's all these stories about her, how she doesn't sing, she's not really a singer. She jacks songs.
Yeah.
She's not nice and all this crazy stuff. And you just realize like how connected to P. Diddy she was and how
Oh
she
yeah.
supposedly brought the gun in and all that. Like what people do for fame. And now she's been
Yeah.
famous forever. It's crazy to me.
Yeah, yeah, they talk about that in that Star Child thread that we were kind of hitting on earlier, that message board thread. Some guy, I think it was Star Child actually, who talked about in one of his posts. He said, "You won't believe, most normal people wouldn't believe what people do to get into the limelight and what they do to stay there. Once they're in there, they still have to do, bad shit to keep getting casted and keep getting deals and things like that." So,
Oh, it's so crazy, dude. And
yeah.
I'm sorry, but if you're a 14-year-old at a nightclub at 5 in the morning, you're probably coming from really horrible families at that point.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. I mean that Richie Albertini guy on the call when he talked about the Aussie, he talks about that. It was all kids from like Beverly Hills High School, Fairfax High School, like they were all really rich kids whose parents just didn't give a crap about them because the parents were really busy with their jobs. A lot of them, worked in entertainment, worked in the entertainment industry and were traveling all the time. So these kids, just kind of had free reign and could do whatever. And they just all started hanging out at this 5 a.m. nightclub and never going to school or
Nothing good
anything. And
happens after midnight. Nothing.
no, yeah. So it's a pretty, it's amazing to me that a place like that existed, but it did.
Oh, but it's also like, it's like something's happened in LA too, where like a lot of the outward debauchery is gone behind closed doors. You don't see it like you used to. Like Johnny. Johnny used to live off Santa Monica Boulevard. It was easier for him to sell his ass that way, right? So he was always near there.
Well, I'm
But
all about convenience. So
yeah, that's it. But Johnny doesn't live there anymore. But Johnny, wouldn't you agree? Like it, like I remember, like what I would do is I would go do my show. I would do my show late night at the Comedy Store, and then I would drive through all the parts of LA just to look at the like all the wild things. I used to
no,
love.
totally. Yeah. I mean, it's funny. The city has become worse, like dirtier in some ways, but in other ways, yeah, it's kind of like you said, gone behind closed doors. I mean, I used to get on, I'd walk back from the Comedy Store, through West Hollywood, to be fair. And West Hollywood, if you don't know, it's a nice place to live.
It's not the
Uh,
gays keep it clean.
but I get so much just shit, verbal, all the way home.
Harassment.
Yeah, well, yeah, you could call it harassment. I thought it was a nice pick me up, to my ego. I
Dude, gay guys will
love
make you feel good. They'll be like, "You are stunning." You're like, "Thank you. I needed to hear that.
yeah.
I'll live
And
another day. I'll live another day."
now, from the sound of it, you're more likely to get stabbed than catcalled on the way home. I mean, I'm hearing about like open air daytime robberies now in that same area. Some guy the other day I met for Craigslist, and he was like,
Why you mean for Craigslist? What are
I
you
got a
doing?
telescope. That telescope I bought
Oh, okay,
right
all
after
right.
work, and he said, "Dude, when you said you wanted to meet me in an alley off La Brea, I was like, oh god, please no." And
But he still showed up.
yeah,
You're like,
he said,
"Oh."
well, and he said a block from where we were, they had just had like several people get just in the middle of the day. These guys jump out of a car, you know, shake them down, and then get back in armed with guns and stuff. And that area, it's just a little east of La Brea is not a bad area. So,
Oh. So
so
let's get into speaking of disasters. Let's get into the Leonard roadkill brain implant disaster? What is that about?
Yeah. Well, I thought that was kind of fitting because that's kind of where the term tinfoil hat got popular and got
Let's go, bro.
associated.
Let's
Yeah,
go.
man. So there was this dude, Leonard Kyle, back in like the 1960s, and he worked for Polaroid, and he was like a really genius inventor, and he had all these patents on the Polaroid instant camera. And the Polaroid instant camera was like kind of like the iPhone of its time. Like it was a total game changer because
Yes.
before you take photos, you got to like develop them and do all the stuff. The instant camera, you take a photo and you can actually see it. So it was just total game changer. This dude had all these patents on it and he'd help, develop it, but he was kind of like a little cuckoo. Like he was really paranoid about his wife cheating on him, and I guess he was a little mentally unstable. And he would fly into these like violent rages. And so he was convinced to go see these two doctors, Vernon Mark and Frank Irvin. And then there's some controversy over whether he agreed to get a brain implant or if they just implanted him without him knowing it. But what happened was he got a brain implant and he started just basically going crazy. He started getting these really bad headaches. He could hardly even function. And he was, like found just wandering around, talking to himself. And so he's committed to a mental asylum. And he found that if he put a garbage can, like a metal garbage can over his head, it
What?
would stop the pain. And so he would start walking around with a metal garbage can. Later on, he found that if he made a hat out of tinfoil and put it on, that would stop the pain in his head. And so he would constantly walk around with this tinfoil hat. And he even like went to some, because he was involved in like this court battle because he was claiming like he was one of the inventors of this Polaroid camera. He had these patents that were stolen from him.
Oh my
He
God,
even
really?
yeah, so he was like involved in this court battle while he was confined to this mental asylum. Everybody thought he was crazy, talking about how he had a brain implant and he invented, one of the best inventions of all time. And he was in a mental asylum and he was, just naturally a little strange. But he would always walk around with this tinfoil hat on. And so that's kind of where the term tinfoil hat became associated with like being crazy.
Oh,
Like if
that's
you Google,
crazy. Isn't the
yeah, because
story that Kurt told on Joe Rogan? Yeah, like that. I didn't listen to
yeah,
it, but I remember him
yeah,
saying that. That is nuts.
yeah.
So
Because if
it's
you
not tinfoil
Google it,
hat.
they
It's
say,
a trash can.
well, he did a trash can first, and then he started using tinfoil hat because it was, much more convenient to just wear a little tinfoil hat as opposed to a big trash can. But if you Google it, they say like tinfoil hat was from like some comic book or something in the 1920s where the hero made a tinfoil hat to block like a death ray or like a mind control ray. But that has nothing to do with like being crazy or anything like that. Like the reason tinfoil hat is associated with crazy was because of this guy, Leonard Kyle. Apparently, he even like showed up to a couple court cases like wearing his tinfoil hat. Couldn't find pictures of it or anything, but it's pretty interesting. And then anyway, the whole story gets into kind of like the CIA because these two doctors who implanted him had major links to the
What?
CIA. Oh yeah, yeah, and it was right around the time of like MK Ultra was just kind of the CIA was doing all these, experiments with mind control and how to control people's minds. And then this guy Edwin Land, who ran Polaroid and made just enormous amounts of money from the camera, he also had connections to the CIA because he helped them with like photographic equipment during the war, like on spy planes and whatnot. And so there's all these kind of like shady connections. It's actually kind of interesting. One little side note, this happened in Boston. And at the time, these two doctors, they worked at one of the big hospitals in Boston, and there was a intern from Harvard Medical School who followed them around, and his name was Michael Crichton. So Michael Crichton wrote like Jurassic Park. After he graduated from med school, instead of becoming a doctor, he started writing novels. He wrote Jurassic Park. He created ER. He's one of the most successful writers ever. And anyway, Michael Crichton wrote a book. It's called The Terminal Man, and it got made into a movie in the 70s. I think it stars Michael Douglas. I could be wrong on that. Um, but it was a big release, and the whole plot of the movie and the book, The Terminal Man, is about a guy who has a really bad temper problem and he goes in and gets a brain implant and it drives him crazy and he tracks down the doctors who did it and tries to kill them. And it's kind of funny in the book and in the movie, one thing that happens is this guy who has the brain implant breaks into the house of one of the doctors and has her cornered. He's got a big knife and he's got her cornered in her kitchen. And how she escapes is she reaches over and turns on the microwave, and the waves from the microwave getting turned on disable him, and he collapses to the ground.
Whoa.
Yeah, it's kind of tied into the whole brain implant.
Well, I've talked about this before on this show, but about, you always see these commercials like, hey, do you have an invention? Well, come to us. We'll make sure we get it right, sir. I'm like, you are just mining inventions
Yeah,
that you can steal. That's all you're doing. It's
yeah,
like the people are like, hey, send us your gold, we'll send you money. And like anyone who put gold into an envelope and send it off is a sucker. Anybody who
yeah,
calls these things and gives them their idea, I'm sure they just get the worst ideas and then one idea. They're like, damn, that's a great idea. And they just jack
yeah,
it,
yeah,
which is very interesting too, because you think of DARPA and all the stuff going on in DARPA, right?
yeah.
But occasionally there must be something, some invention, excuse me, where civilians are onto something that the government either was trying to do or never even thought of. And they're like, damn, dude, that's a great idea. We got to jack that.
Yeah, we got it. Yeah.
And Polaroid is probably it.
Yeah. Well, you always hear stories too about like some of these plane crashes that happen. Like a lot of times there'll be like people who hold patents on the plane
Yeah,
that
yeah.
crashes.
Oh,
I've
fascinating.
always heard,
Well, the film
yeah,
that one supposedly had what was the one that disappeared that the whole thing was like
370. Yeah.
MH.
MH370 or,
something about a patent about being able to not be detected on sonar or radar. That you could just
oh,
and they can't
interesting.
see you, and that five people had patents on it, were on the
We're
plane, and
on
the
the
one
plane.
who
Yeah.
didn't was a Rothschild. You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? You hear it all the time. It's crazy. So listen, I don't want to keep you all day, but what? Tell me the story of Howard Hughes,
Oh,
and
yeah, man. That's one
we'll
of
end
the
on this.
recent
Get into some
videos.
Hollywood. Yeah. Tell me
Yeah,
the
dude.
what you know about him.
Well, it's really interesting. So basically, like, there's the Leonardo DiCaprio movie. There's a lot more to the story than what's shown in the movie. And like Howard Hughes was crazy because like throughout like the 1940s and 50s, he was like the biggest celebrity in the world. He was the richest man in the world, and he was like the biggest womanizer in the world. You can look on his Wikipedia page and it lists out every woman that he dated, and it's like every A-list actress of the time. He was, this massive businessman. He was always photographed out in public and everything. And then around the mid 1950s, he just vanished off the face of the earth and nobody saw him for the next like 18 years of his life. And I mean, it's just so bizarre that, one of the most notorious, famous, successful people could just vanish, but that's what happened. And so he vanished off the face of the earth, and he had this massive business empire and this group called that Kurt kind of talked about called the Mormon Mafia of these Mormons who were led by this guy Frank Gay moved in and started kind of like running the show and running Howard Hughes's empire. And all throughout it, there was like all these stories like, oh, Howard Hughes says this, Howard Hughes says that, but no one ever saw him. He never gave like a public statement or anything. He just vanished off the face of the earth for the last 20 years of his life. And then he finally died in the mid 1970s. And the only, like, for instance, like when he died, the only recent photo anyone could find of him was from 1955. So they just ran photos of him from 1955. And I kind of get into all the many strange aspects to the story in the video, but it's just so weird how he just completely and utterly, and the official story is that he just went crazy and
Yeah.
kind of locked himself in a hotel room and everything, but no one ever saw him. I mean, it seems like to me like the whole thing was made up. He was either dead or like being held as like a prisoner somewhere. the whole time.
I mean, there's a lot of stories right now that seem very similar to that, and people may
Yeah.
not know this, but like that Wendy Williams, who was like the talk
Yeah.
show host, she's
Yeah.
supposedly like at the window begging for help right now because she's in
Yeah.
like a old home or she's everyone's like she's got dementia, but here we go with that. The Gene Hackman stuff is really
Yeah.
weird,
Really
right?
weird.
In that
Yeah.
like nobody heard from him for weeks, dude. Like if I don't hear from my
Right.
father in like a day or two, I'm ready to get on a plane and fly to Arizona to
Well,
see if he's okay.
and what his wife, who is you hear he's 95, she's like 64, so she was like sprightly, uh and she got hantavirus, which is what if you watch that movie Outbreak, it's one of the other viruses they mention is like it's 10 times worse than hantavirus. Incredibly rare though.
Oh.
A few people get it a year in every state. It's from aerosolized urine and feces of rats that are infected, and it can't
Oof.
be spread from human to human. But it's like a coin flip, live or die with that, even with treatment. Like one of the stories I read was a doctor said that he had a patient that was seemed perfectly healthy, infected with that, and then 1 second they were like, oh, I don't feel too well, and then 20 minutes later they were just dead. It's like one of those things that rapidly destroys your lungs apparently,
Oh,
and like your blood pressure drops.
like in minutes?
Yeah, in minutes. Yeah, it can. Like I mean, you get infected and then it takes a while to kill you, but it can go from like zero to dead rapidly. And so she got this, and then apparently he lingered, like, because he's apparently had dementia for a while. He died like a week later or more, possibly, and they found him in a different part of the house. And somehow one of them had the wherewithal to crack open the door so that the dogs were there, could get in and out. But one dog had just had surgery, so it was in a crate, and that one died because obviously it wasn't being fed. But yeah, and they get there, and they first thing it's like gas, and so they run around doing the test for that, and it didn't. There was a small gas leak, but nothing that could have killed anybody. But yeah, it's really strange, dude. And the last time they saw this woman was she had a mask on, which should tell you she's unwell mentally at least. But she, no, what this thing presents as a respiratory illness, this hantavirus. So she was getting like respiratory treatment at, like medicine at over the counter shit at like a CVS. And then that's the last time there's any record of them. And then I think it was it the I might have been their cleaning guy or somebody that finally called, looked in the window, and saw her just laying on the floor. With another reason it was weird, there were pills all around her, and they thought maybe it was a suicide, but then they
Mhm.
looked into that, and those they were thyroid medication that was being taken as prescribed. So I don't know if there's anything too bizarre there other than it just being an incredible mystery for a while, but
It's
Hmm.
really 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 weird.
it's
And
strange.
you get into like Britney Spears, like and Anna Nicole Smith,
Oh yeah.
where they were just drugging them forever
Yeah.
to the point where Howard K. Stern, he had to put a case.
Yeah.
Howard K. Stern was found guilty of that, of just basically drugging them forever. Like if you see the music video Piece of Me, I'm in it, and it's based on a sketch that we did called Fake Heat. Me and my buddy Jason Tebow wrote it. It's a very funny sketch, and
Very funny.
they basically Dana produced it. She got the idea from the sketch and pitched it to Britney Spears, and she's like, "Yeah, let's do it." And the reason that video is very big is because her dad had to step in and basically take her from all these boyfriends that were just constantly drugging her.
Wow.
And then
Huh.
everyone was then everybody goes, "Oh, Britney's dad is a bad guy," and so they like of course, all the women just rushed together and got her free, and now she's a crazy person.
Yeah. Nuts. It's
It's
Hollywood,
crazy to
man.
me.
It
Yeah,
is.
Hollywood, dude. But money and power, and what people will do for money and power.
Mm-hmm.
It's very crazy, dude. Yeah, it's definitely a crazy thing. Hey, man, Andy, I enjoyed talking to you, even though, you didn't get a lot in early.
No,
Sorry
it's all
about that.
right.
Sorry about that. You were fire, though. It was a fire episode. One more time, Andy, tell them where they could find you.
YouTube, Control Alt History. I'm on all the major social media networks. Control Alt History. That's Alt History, ALT, like Control Alt Delete. And yeah, that's mostly where I am.
Do you upload yourself to Twitter? Starting to get real traction on there.
Oh, are you really?
Yeah, like
Yeah, I
really
didn't
good
know. Yeah, I didn't know if there was. I know there used to be like a time limit to videos that you could upload. I don't. Does that exist
Well, if you do
anymore?
like the blue check mark, you can go two
You can
hours.
go as
I've
long.
posted videos over 2 hours on there.
Okay, I might have to start doing that then.
And do you
Yeah.
have any premium content like a Patreon or anything?
I got a Patreon. Yeah, I don't do much with it, but I usually send out, I always have like bibliography sheets for like the videos I make with just links to various websites, articles, like things that I've used to compile the information. So those are available on Patreon as well, but I don't do it too much on there.
Okay, well, if you could send me the links, I'll give you my email off
Yeah,
air. Send me any links you want to be included. And hey, dude, great episode. You're welcome back anytime,
I'd love
and
to.
we'll make it happen whenever you want to promote anything or you got a video you want to get out. We'll have a discussion on it. And yeah, man, I appreciate.